Sarah Mitchell's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, her unseeing eyes fixed straight ahead as her heightened senses detected the approaching footsteps. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The small cafe in San Antonio had been her sanctuary since returning from Afghanistan, but today something was different. The air felt thick with tension, and despite her blindness, she could feel the presence of danger. The same instinct that had kept her alive during her years as a Special Forces operative wasn't failing her now. The morning had started like any other at Rosa's Cafe, a quiet establishment tucked away in a corner of San Antonio's old district. Sarah sat in her usual spot, the leather booth worn smooth from years of use, her service dog Zeus lying quietly at her feet. The regular morning crowd had thinned out, leaving behind the familiar scent of coffee and freshly baked pastries. Her acute hearing picked up the gentle whir of ceiling fans and the soft clink of dishes from the kitchen. Sarah's world hadn't always been dark. 3 years ago, she had been leading tactical operations in Afghanistan's most dangerous territories. The explosion that took her sight had ended her military career, but it hadn't diminished her capabilities. It had only forced her to adapt, to become something more. Her other senses had sharpened to extraordinary levels, and her military training had taken on new dimensions. The first warning sign came when Zeus's ears perked up, his body tensing slightly against her leg. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to his fur, feeling the subtle change in his posture. Then came the sound, boots on tile, multiple sets, moving with a purpose that seemed out of place in the usually relaxed cafe. The conversations around her died down, replaced by an uneasy silence. "Señorita," a voice broke through the quiet, heavy with a Mexican accent and dripping with false courtesy. "This is a beautiful dog you have here." The speaker was close, too close, and Sarah could smell expensive cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. More footsteps approached, surrounding her booth. She counted them by sound. 5 men, strategically positioned. Sarah's fingers remained steady on her coffee cup, but her mind was already mapping the cafe's layout, remembering every detail she'd memorized over the past months. The exit was 15 steps behind her, the counter 20 steps to her right. Zeus remained still but alert, waiting for her command. "Thank you," she replied evenly, her voice carrying the calm authority of a seasoned officer. "He's a service dog." She could hear the subtle shift of fabric as the men moved closer, could sense their growing tension. These weren't ordinary customers. Their movements were too coordinated, too deliberate. "We've been watching you, Señorita Mitchell," another voice said, deeper than the first. "You've been asking questions about certain business operations in the area. Our employers are concerned." The threat in his voice was clear, but Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same steadiness that had guided her through countless operations. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah responded, her unseeing eyes staring straight ahead. But she knew exactly what they meant. Her investigation into the disappearance of local veterans had led her to uncover a network of cartel operations using former military personnel as unwitting drug mules. She'd been getting too close. The first man leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. "Don't play dumb, blind girl. You may have lost your sight, but we know who you are. Former Captain Sarah Mitchell, Special Forces. You should have stayed out of our business." His hand came to rest on the table, the subtle sound of a knife being unsheathed reaching her ears. The cafe had gone completely silent now. Sarah could hear the rapid heartbeats of nearby patrons, smell their fear. But beneath her table, her fingers were already moving, typing a message on her phone with practiced precision. One number, that's all she needed. One call to set everything in motion. "You're right about one thing," Sarah said, her voice taking on an edge that made several of the men shift uncomfortably. "I am Captain Sarah Mitchell, and you've just made a terrible mistake." Her thumb pressed send on the message she typed, and she allowed herself a small smile. They thought her blindness made her vulnerable, but they had no idea what she was capable of. The real question wasn't whether she could defend herself. It was whether they would survive what was coming next. Zeus remained perfectly still, beside her, waiting for her signal. Sarah took another sip of her coffee, savoring the moment. The cartel had just picked the wrong veteran to intimidate, and they were about to learn exactly why her former team had called her Ghost. Not because she couldn't see, but because her enemies never saw her coming. Sarah could hear the subtle shift of metal, weapons being adjusted beneath jackets, safeties being quietly disengaged. The cartel members were getting restless, their confidence wavering at her calm demeanor. She took another deliberate sip of her coffee, using the motion to cover her careful assessment of their positions based on sound and air movement. "You think this is funny, Pera?" The first man growled, his cologne-heavy scent moving closer. "You think because you were military, you're untouchable." His hands slammed down on the table, causing cups to rattle. Several cafe patrons gasped, and Sarah could hear chairs scraping as people began to leave. But Sarah wasn't concerned about the display of aggression. Her attention was focused on the almost imperceptible vibration of her phone, a single pulse that told her the message had been received. She had roughly 10 minutes before her backup arrived, and she needed to control the situation until then. "Rosa!" Sarah called out calmly to the cafe owner, her voice carrying across the now quiet space. "Take everyone to the back room, now." There was authority in her tone, the kind that commanded troops in combat zones, and Rosa didn't hesitate. Sarah could hear the shuffle of feet as remaining customers were quickly ushered away. "How considerate," the second man sneered, "trying to protect the civilians, but who's going to protect you?" The sound of knuckles cracking followed his words, a deliberate intimidation tactic that made Sarah want to smile. They still didn't understand what they were dealing with. Sarah's training had taught her to create detailed mental maps of her surroundings, to understand spaces through echo and airflow. In the 3 months she'd been coming to Rosa's cafe, she had memorized every inch, the exact distance between tables, the location of support columns, the height of the counter. Her blindness wasn't a handicap, it was just another tactical consideration. "Last chance," Sarah said quietly, her hand moving to Zeus's head. "Walk away. Forget about me and the veterans you've been exploiting." She could feel Zeus's muscles tensing under her touch, ready for her command. The German shepherd had been specially trained not just as a guide dog, but as a combat assistant. He was a weapon they hadn't accounted for. The leader's laugh was harsh, grating. "You're in no position to make threats, Captain." The sound of a knife being fully drawn cut through the air. "We're going to make an example of you. Show everyone what happens when they stick their nose in cartel business." Sarah's unseeing eyes remained fixed ahead, but her other senses were painting a precise picture of the scene. 5 men, the leader directly in front of her, 2 on her left, 2 on her right. The knife wielder was closest, about 2 feet from her left side. Their breathing patterns told her they were confident, relaxed, a tactical error she could exploit. "You know what's interesting about losing your sight?" Sarah said conversationally, her fingers still resting lightly on Zeus's fur. "It forces you to adapt, to become more." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture that had unnerved many since her injury. "For instance, right now I can hear your heartbeats, the way your weight shifts on the floorboards, the subtle sound of your weapons against your clothes." Her words had the intended effect. She could hear their heartbeats quicken, their breathing patterns change. Uncertainty was creeping in, and uncertainty bred mistakes. The leader took an aggressive step forward, exactly as she'd anticipated. "Enough games!" he snarled, reaching for her. But Sarah was already moving. In one fluid motion, she flipped the table upward, sending coffee cups flying. The heavy wooden surface caught the leader in the chest, driving him backward. Simultaneously, she gave Zeus the command they'd practiced countless times. "Zeus, protect!" The German shepherd launched into action, his powerful body targeting the knife-wielder with practiced precision. Sarah was moving too, her body responding to years of training and months of adaptation. Without sight, she had learned to fight, using sound and touch, turning her other senses into weapons more precise than eyes. The cartel members recovered quickly, but Sarah was already flowing through their positions like water. A punch whistled past her ear. She caught the arm, using the attacker's momentum to slam him into his companion. The sound of their collision told her they were temporarily neutralized. Zeus's growls mixed with a man's pained shouts as the dog expertly disabled the knife-wielder. Sarah spun toward the sound of approaching footsteps, her elbow connecting with a throat, followed by a precise strike to a knee that brought another attacker down. But the leader had recovered, and Sarah heard the distinctive sound of a pistol being drawn. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice ragged. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Or I start shooting." Sarah went still, but a small smile played at her lips. Because underneath the threats and the chaos, she could hear what they couldn't. The approaching sound of multiple vehicles, moving fast and coordinated. Her backup had arrived ahead of schedule. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Sarah's smile widened as a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" The cartel members were about to learn another important lesson. Never underestimate a veterans network, especially one built over years of special forces operations. The cafe erupted into controlled chaos as federal agents swarmed through the entrance, their movements precise and coordinated. Sarah remained perfectly still, her acute hearing painting a detailed picture of the tactical team's formation. These weren't just any federal agents. She recognized the subtle differences in their gear, their movement patterns. These were her former teammates from the 7th Special Forces Group. "On your knees, hands where we can see them," Commander Jack Reynolds' voice boomed through the space. Sarah allowed herself a small smile at the familiar sound. Jack had been her second in command before the explosion, and now he led an elite DEA tactical unit specializing in cartel operations. The cartel members, caught off guard by the sudden intervention, hesitated. Sarah could hear their weapons clattering to the floor, their boots scuffing against tile as they were forced to their knees. Zeus remained at attention by her side, his low growl a warning to anyone who might try something foolish. "You okay, Ghost?" Jack called out, using her old call sign. His footsteps approached with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was dealing with. "Never better," Sarah replied, straightening her jacket, "though they did spill my coffee." The lightness in her tone belied the tension still coursing through her body. Years of combat experience had taught her that the aftermath of a confrontation could be just as dangerous as the fight itself. The leader of the cartel group wasn't done yet. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he spat, his voice tight with controlled rage. "This won't end here. The cartel doesn't forget, and we don't forgive." Sarah turned toward his voice, her unseeing eyes somehow finding him with unnerving accuracy. "Neither do I," she said softly, her words carrying the weight of promise rather than threat. "And unlike you, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The Los Rojos cartel, specifically the Martinez branch operating out of San Antonio. You've been using veterans support groups to recruit drug mules, targeting those struggling with PTSD and financial problems." She heard Jack's sharp intake of breath. This was new intelligence, even to him. Sarah had spent months gathering this information. using her disability as a cover to move unnoticed through cartel-controlled areas. People tended to talk freely around the blind woman at the cafe, never suspecting she was mapping their entire operation. "Secure them and call for transport," Jack ordered his team. "We'll need to process them at the federal building." The sounds of handcuffs clicking into place and frustrated grunts filled the air as the cartel members were restrained. Sarah felt a gentle hand on her arm, Maria, one of her former team members. "The cafe's clear," Maria reported. "Rosa and the other customers are safe in the back room. No casualties." Her voice softened. "It's good to see you in action again, Captain." The comment brought a mix of emotions to Sarah's surface. The explosion that took her sight had nearly destroyed her, but it had also forced her to become something more. Her other senses had developed to nearly superhuman levels, and her tactical mind had adapted to process information in entirely new ways. "We've been tracking Los Rojos for months," Jack said, moving closer to speak privately. "But we could never get close enough to their veteran recruitment operation." "How did you figure it out?" Sarah gestured for Zeus to guide her to a nearby unturned table, settling into a chair. "When you can't see, you learn to listen. Really listen. I started noticing patterns at the veterans support meetings, certain members disappearing only to return weeks later with suspicious stories about business trips to Mexico. Then there were the recruiters, always watching, always evaluating who might be desperate enough to take their offers." The sound of police sirens approached in the distance as Jack pulled up a chair beside her. "You should have told me what you were working on," he said, concern evident in his voice. "This was dangerous, even for you." "I needed to be sure," Sarah replied. "Besides, being underestimated has its advantages. They never suspected the blind veteran was building a case against them." She paused, her head tilting slightly. "Though I have to admit, I didn't expect them to make such a bold move in broad daylight." "They're getting desperate," Maria interjected. "Border Patrol has been squeezing their usual routes. They needed new ways to move product." Sarah nodded, her fingers absently running through Zeus's fur. And what better way than using veterans? People above suspicion, with clean records and legitimate reasons to travel. Her voice hardened. "They're exploiting good people, Jack. People who served their country, only to be used by criminals when they're at their most vulnerable." The sound of the cartel members being led out of the cafe was punctuated by the leader's final threat. "This isn't over, Bruja. The cartel will find you." Sarah stood, her posture straight and commanding despite her disability. "No," she said quietly, though her words carried across the room. "It's just beginning." She turned to Jack, her expression determined. "I want in on this investigation, officially. These are my people they're targeting, and I won't stand by while it happens." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken concerns and possibilities. But Sarah knew that this was just the first step in a much larger battle, one she had uniquely positioned herself to fight. Inside the federal building's tactical operations room, Sarah sat at a conference table, her fingers moving across a specialized tactile display that allowed her to read the digital maps and documents being discussed. Zeus lay vigilantly at her feet as Jack briefed the assembled team on the morning's events. The 5 subjects apprehended at Rosa's cafe have been identified as mid-level operatives of the Los Rojos cartel, Jack explained. Their leader, Marco Ramirez, is a known enforcer for the Martinez family. Initial interrogation suggests they were acting on direct orders from higher up the chain. Sarah's fingers traced the patterns on her display, building a mental image of the cartel's known territories and operations. "They're expanding," she interjected. "The veteran recruitment program isn't just about finding drug mules. It's about building a trained force, Many of these veterans have specialized skills, combat experience. Maria, who had been analyzing data from seized phones, spoke up. Sarah's right. We're seeing evidence of a larger operation. The cartel isn't just recruiting veterans for transport. They're targeting those with specific military backgrounds. Former intelligence officers, weapons specialists, combat engineers. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah could hear the subtle shifts in breathing, the tension building in the air. They're building an army, she said quietly. But they made a crucial mistake today. They revealed themselves too soon. Jack's chair creaked as he leaned forward. Which brings us to our next point. Sarah, the Bureau wants to bring you in as a special consultant on this case. Your knowledge of both military operations and the cartel's recruitment tactics makes you uniquely qualified. Sarah's unseeing eyes remained fixed ahead, but a slight smile played at her lips. They're not concerned about my disability. They're more concerned about the cartel building a private military force, Jack responded. Besides, after what you did at the cafe, let's just say your capabilities aren't in question. The sound of footsteps in the hallway caught Sarah's attention before anyone else noticed. Her head turned slightly toward the door just as it opened. Director Chen, she said, surprising the newcomer who hadn't yet announced himself. Captain Mitchell, Director Chen's voice carried authority tempered with respect. Your reputation precedes you. I've reviewed the footage from the cafe incident. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. Sarah nodded in acknowledgement. The cartel underestimated me because of my blindness. It's an advantage we can continue to exploit. Her fingers moved across the tactical display again. They don't know how much information I've already gathered, how close I am to their operation. Tell us, Chen commanded, taking a seat. Sarah leaned forward, her voice taking on the precise tone she'd used during mission briefings in Afghanistan. The cartel's veteran recruitment program operates through a network of seemingly legitimate support groups and job placement services. They target veterans who are struggling, financially, emotionally, or both. Offer them simple courier jobs at first, good pay for minimal risk. She continued, her fingers tracing patterns on the table as she spoke. But it escalates. Once they have hooks in, they start demanding more dangerous assignments. Many of these veterans have families, mortgages. They can't just walk away. And those with specialized skills. They're offered different roles, training cartel soldiers, planning operations, setting up secure communications. How many are we talking about? Chen asked. Based on my observations and conversations at various support groups, I'd estimate at least 50 veterans have been recruited in the San Antonio area alone, possibly hundreds across Texas. Sarah's expression hardened. And for each one who takes their offer, there are dozens more being evaluated as potential recruits. Jack's fist hit the table, causing several people to jump. Sarah didn't flinch. We need to shut this down, he growled. These are our brothers and sisters they're exploiting. Agreed, Chen said. Captain Mitchell, we're officially bringing you onto this task force. Your role will be to continue gathering intelligence through your existing networks while working with our tactical team to plan intervention strategies. Sarah nodded, but held up a hand. One condition, she said, firmly. Any veterans we identify as having been coerced into working for the cartel, they get help, not handcuffs. Many of them are victims here, manipulated when they were at their most vulnerable. The silence that followed was heavy with consideration. Finally, Chen spoke. Agreed, within reason. Each case will be evaluated individually. There's something else, Maria interjected. The phones we seized at the cafe, they show regular communication with a location just outside the city, a ranch registered to a shell company. Satellite imagery shows increased activity there over the past month. Sarah's fingers moved across her display, memorizing the location. A training facility, she said with certainty. The cartel needs somewhere to consolidate their recruited veterans, put their skills to use. We need to move fast, Jack added. After today's incident, they'll know we're onto them. They'll either abandon the operation or accelerate it. Sarah stood, Zeus immediately at attention beside her. Then we don't give them time to do either. Director, I have a plan, but you'll have to trust me to do things my way. The room fell silent, waiting for Chen's response. Sarah could hear his measured breathing, the subtle sound of papers being shifted as he considered her words. Finally, he spoke. You have operational authority, Captain. Whatever you need. A grim smile crossed Sarah's face. The cartel had thought her blindness made her weak. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The tactical operations room transformed into a hive of activity as Sarah laid out her plan. Her fingers danced across the tactile display while she briefed the team, her other hand occasionally reaching down to reassure Zeus, who remained alert at her side. The ranch isn't just a training facility, Sarah explained, her voice carrying the weight of certainty. Based on the patterns I've observed, it's their primary recruitment and processing center. Veterans are brought there under the guise of job interviews or training seminars. Once inside, they're evaluated, categorized, and either recruited or, she paused, jaw tightening, eliminated if deemed a security risk. Jack leaned forward, his chair creaking slightly. How do you want to play this, Ghost? We go in through the front door, Sarah said, a slight smile playing at her lips. They're expecting me to hide, to run. Instead, I'm going to walk right into their operation as a potential recruit. Absolutely not, Jack's response was. Immediate, sharp. It's too dangerous. They already know who you are. Sarah's unseeing eyes turned toward his voice. They know I was asking questions. They know I'm a blind veteran. But they don't know what I know. More importantly, they don't know about my connection to this task force. Maria spoke up from across the room. She has a point. The cartel's ego works in our favor here. They'll assume Sarah's desperation to prove herself useful despite her disability makes her a perfect target. Besides, Sarah continued, her fingers tracing the tactical map, we have something they want: intelligence, combat experience, a special forces captain who's fallen on hard times. It's exactly the kind of recruitment opportunity they look for. Director Chen's voice cut through the tension. How would this work? Sarah's posture straightened, shifting into full briefing mode. I make contact through one of their known recruitment channels, play up my frustration with civilian life, my struggle to find meaningful work. They're always watching the veterans, support groups. It won't take long for word to reach them. And once you're inside? Jack asked, his tone still skeptical. I map the facility, identify the veterans being held there, gather concrete evidence of their operation. Zeus isn't just my guide dog. He's been trained to carry specialized surveillance equipment. They'll never suspect a service animal. The room fell silent as the team processed her proposal. Sarah could hear their breathing patterns, sense their mix of admiration and concern. Finally, Chen spoke again. The risk is significant if they discover your true purpose. With all due respect, Director, Sarah interrupted, I've been running high-risk operations since before I lost my sight. My blindness isn't a handicap, it's an asset. They'll be so focused on what I can't do that they won't notice what I am doing. Jack's chair scraped back as he stood. If we do this, we do it right. Full surveillance, backup teams in position. The moment anything seems off, we move in. Sarah nodded. Agreed. But we need to move fast. After today's incident at the cafe, they'll be reviewing their security procedures. We need to get inside before they have time to relocate their operation. How soon? Chen asked. Tomorrow, Sarah replied without hesitation. There's a veterans support group meeting at the community center near the ranch. It's known to be monitored by cartel recruiters. I'll make an appearance. Make sure the right people notice me. Maria's fingers flew across her keyboard. I can have surveillance equipment ready for Zeus by morning. We'll be able to monitor everything: audio, thermal imaging, facility layout. I want tactical teams positioned here and here, Sarah said, her fingers finding specific points on the display. Far enough to avoid detection, close enough to respond if needed. The ranch has multiple access points. We'll need coverage on all of them. The sound of papers shuffling indicated Chen was making notes. What's your exit strategy if things go wrong? Sarah's expression remained calm, but her voice carried steel. I memorize buildings, Director. Every room, every corridor, every possible escape route. It's how I've adapted to my blindness. Within an hour of being inside that facility, I'll know it better than the people who built it. And if they try to force you to participate in illegal activities? Jack's concern was evident. They won't, Sarah said with certainty. First visits are always evaluation only. They need to trust recruits before putting weapons in their hands. That gives us a window of opportunity. Zeus shifted at her feet, sensing her focused energy. Sarah reached down to scratch behind his ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. This is our best chance to shut down their veteran recruitment. Operation. Every day we wait, more of our brothers and sisters get pulled into their web. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence of decision rather than doubt. Sarah could hear the subtle sounds of preparation beginning, equipment being checked, communications being established, plans being finalized. Very. Well, Captain, Chen finally said, operation is approved. Get some rest. Tomorrow you become a cartel recruit. Sarah stood, Zeus rising smoothly with her. One more thing, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. When we move on that ranch, we move to save our people. Any veteran we find there gets treated as a victim first, suspect second. Understood? The chorus of, "Yes, ma'am," that followed brought a slight smile to her face. Tomorrow, the cartel would learn that underestimating a blind veteran was the last mistake they'd ever make. The community center bustled with activity as Sarah made her way inside, Zeus guiding, her with practiced precision. The Veterans Support Group meeting was already underway, the sound of chairs scraping and quiet conversations filling the space. Sarah could sense the mix of familiar faces and new attendees, including the 2 cartel observers she'd detected the moment she entered. "Welcome back, Sarah," Don Martinez, the group facilitator, called out. His voice carried genuine warmth, though Sarah knew he was unaware of his group's exploitation by the cartel. "We missed you last week." Sarah allowed a hint of vulnerability to enter her voice as she replied, "Thank you, Don. I've been struggling lately, trying to figure out where I fit in this civilian world." The words weren't entirely an act. They echoed the real frustrations of many veterans in the room. She took a seat in the circle, Zeus settling at her feet. The surveillance equipment hidden in his service vest was undetectable, transmitting everything to the tactical team monitoring from their mobile command center 3 blocks away. Sarah focused her hearing, picking up the subtle shift in the cartel observer's posture. They were paying attention now. "Would you like to share with the group?" Don asked gently. Sarah straightened in her chair, projecting the perfect mix of military bearing and barely concealed desperation. "Honestly, I'm angry. I led teams in Afghanistan, planned complex operations, kept my people alive in impossible situations. Now, I can barely get a job interview. The moment they see the cane and the dog, all my experience becomes irrelevant." Murmurs of understanding rippled through the group. Sarah could hear the cartel observers leaning forward slightly, their interest piqued. She continued, letting frustration color her words. "I've got bills piling up, skills going to waste. Sometimes I think—" She paused for effect. "Sometimes I think I'd take any job that would let me use my abilities again, prove I'm not worthless just because I can't see." The bait was set. Sarah could hear one of the observers typing on a phone, likely reporting her words to his superiors. The other's breathing had changed. He was preparing to approach her after the meeting. The session continued, other veterans sharing their stories. Sarah participated thoughtfully, building her cover while maintaining awareness of every sound, every movement in the room. Her enhanced hearing picked up the observer's whispered conversation. "She's perfect. Special Forces background. Desperate enough." After the meeting ended, Sarah took her time gathering her things, waiting. Sure enough, footsteps approached. Confident, measured steps of someone used to commanding attention. "Captain Mitchell?" The voice was smooth, professional. "I couldn't help but overhear your situation. My name is Ricardo Vega. I represent a private security firm that values military experience, particularly from veterans with your background." Sarah turned toward his voice, allowing hope to enter her expression. "A security firm? I haven't had much luck with those. They tend to see my blindness as a liability. Our organization has a more nuanced view of capability," Ricardo replied. "We find that determination and experience often matter more than traditional qualifications. Would you be interested in learning more about potential opportunities?" Sarah's fingers tightened slightly on Zeus's harness, the signal for him to begin mapping the immediate area with his hidden sensors. "I'm interested in any legitimate opportunity," she said carefully. Ricardo's laugh was practiced, reassuring. "I assure you, Captain, everything we do is professional. In fact, we're conducting interviews tomorrow at our training facility just outside the city. Would you be available to discuss possibilities?" "Tomorrow?" Sarah allowed a hint of eagerness to enter her voice. "Yes, I would, though I'll need directions I can follow with my condition. Of course, we'll send a car for you. Shall we say 10 a.m.? Ricardo's tone was solicitous, but Sarah could hear the subtle undercurrent of satisfaction. They thought they had her. Sarah nodded, providing her address, a safe house the task force had prepared. As Ricardo walked away, she could hear him making a call, speaking rapid Spanish about a perfect candidate and special forces experience. Once outside the community center, Sarah activated her concealed communicator. "Contact made. They're bringing me in tomorrow morning." "Confirmed," Jack's voice came through her earpiece. Surveillance picked up their call. "They're excited about your background, a little too excited." "That's what we want," Sarah replied quietly. "Any word on activity at the ranch?" "Thermal. Imaging shows increased movement. They're preparing for something big. Be careful, Ghost. I don't like how eager they are to get you inside." Sarah's lips curved in a grim smile. "They think they're recruiting a desperate blind veteran. Let them believe it. Have the tactical teams ready, but remember, no one moves until I give the signal. We need to identify every veteran they're holding before we shut this down." "Understood. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be interesting." Sarah and Zeus made their way home, her steps confident despite her blindness. The cartel thought they were drawing her into their web, never suspecting that she was deliberately entering the spider's lair. They would learn too late that sometimes the most dangerous predator was the one they thought was prey. Back at the safe house, Sarah spent hours reviewing her mental maps and contingency plans. Tomorrow would bring her face to face with the organization exploiting her fellow veterans. She intended to make them regret every moment of it. The sleek black SUV arrived precisely at 10 a.m., its tires crunching on the gravel outside the safe house. Sarah stood ready, dressed professionally but comfortably, Zeus at her side. Her white cane was folded and tucked into her bag, a deliberate choice to show trust in her escorts while keeping it accessible if needed. "Captain Mitchell," a new voice called out, deeper than Ricardo's, with an edge of authority. "I'm Carlos. Thank you for meeting with us today. May I help you to the vehicle?" Sarah allowed Carlos to guide her to the SUV, noting the sound of at least 2 other men already inside. Zeus followed, his specialized vest continuing to gather data about their surroundings. As they pulled away from the curb, Sarah's acute hearing picked up the subtle click of doors locking automatically. "I hope you don't mind, Captain," Carlos said from the front passenger seat, "but we'll need to take an indirect route to the facility. Security protocols, you understand." Sarah nodded, playing her role perfectly. "Of course. In my line of work, we called it counter-surveillance routing." She felt the men in the vehicle tense slightly at her casual mention of military terminology. Good. Let them remember who they were dealing with. The drive took nearly an hour, with multiple turns and direction changes designed to disorient passengers. But Sarah's other senses had long since adapted to compensate for her blindness. Every turn, every change in road surface, every shift in ambient sound was carefully mapped in her mind. She knew exactly where they were heading. "Your service record is impressive, Captain," Carlos commented, as they turned onto what Sarah recognized as the private road leading to the ranch. Afghanistan, special forces, multiple commendations. It's a shame the civilian world doesn't know how to utilize such valuable experience. "Their loss," Sarah replied carefully. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about what kind of security work you think a blind veteran could handle." A low chuckle from Carlos. "Let's just say our organization takes a creative approach to talent acquisition. We see potential where others see limitations." The SUV finally came to a stop. Sarah could hear multiple vehicles nearby, the sound of men training in the distance, and the subtle electronic hum of surveillance equipment. The ranch was exactly what she'd expected, a fully operational paramilitary training facility. "Welcome to our evaluation center," Carlos announced as he helped her from the vehicle. "First, we'll need to have a brief security screening. Standard procedure." Sarah kept her expression neutral as they led her into the building. Her heightened senses were already building a detailed map, 20 steps to the entrance, heavy. Security door, air conditioning vents positioned every 30 feet, multiple armed guards trying to move quietly along the corridors. They entered a room that smelled of metal and gun oil. "Captain, we'll need to hold onto your phone and any other electronic devices," Carlos said. "You understand?" Sarah complied, having expected this. The phone she handed over was a decoy. The real communications equipment was integrated into Zeus's vest, designed to be undetectable by standard security sweeps. The dog sat calmly as a guard passed a scanner over him, the device registering nothing unusual about the standard service animal equipment. "Now," Carlos said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike, "let's discuss the real reason you're here. Our organization has been watching you for some time, Captain. Your investigation into our activities was noticeable." Sarah allowed a hint of tension to enter her posture. "I don't know what you're talking about. I came here about a job, opportunity." "Let's not play games," Carlos replied smoothly. "You've been asking questions about missing veterans, looking into our recruitment operations. Initially, this concerned us, but then we realized you weren't trying to expose us. You were trying to understand us, to find a way in." Sarah remained silent, letting them believe they were reading her correctly. Inside, she was cataloging every sound, every movement, building a complete picture of the facility and its occupants. "So here's our proposition," Carlos continued. "Instead of working against us, work for us. Your military experience, your leadership skills, they're wasted in the civilian world, but we could put them to good use, very well paid use." "And if I refuse?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady. "Why would you?" Another voice joined the conversation, Ricardo, from the support group. "We both know you're desperate for purpose, for respect. We can give you that. Plus, your unique condition makes you perfect for certain." Specialized operations. Sarah tilted her head, because who would suspect a blind woman? Exactly, Carlos said approvingly. So, Captain Mitchell, what do you say? Ready to be part of something meaningful again? Sarah appeared to consider the offer, while her trained hearing picked up what the others didn't, the sound of multiple people behind a nearby wall, their breathing patterns suggesting they were under duress. The veterans they were holding must be close. I'd need to know more, she said carefully, about the operation, the requirements, the risks. Of course, Carlos replied. Let's give you the full tour, show you exactly what we're building here. As they led her deeper into the facility, Sarah allowed herself a small, hidden smile. Everything was going according to plan. Soon, they would show her exactly what she needed to see, or rather hear. And then they would learn just how badly they had miscalculated. The tour of the facility became an exercise in precise mental mapping as Sarah was led through various areas of the ranch. Her heightened senses absorbed every detail. The echo of footsteps revealing room dimensions, the subtle changes in air pressure indicating hidden doors, the whispered conversations of guards revealing patrol patterns. Zeus padded silently beside her, his specialized equipment continuing to gather crucial data. This is our primary training area, Carlos explained as they entered a large space that resonated with the sounds of physical combat. We believe in maintaining military standards in all our operations. Sarah could hear the distinct sounds of hand-to-hand combat training, the impact of fists on training bags, and the controlled breathing of men practicing combat maneuvers. But beneath those obvious sounds, her trained hearing picked up something more concerning, the muffled voices of people under guard in adjacent rooms. Impressive facility, Sarah commented, carefully keeping her tone neutral. How many operators do you typically train at once? Currently, we have 32 candidates. In various stages of evaluation, Ricardo answered from her left. Though not all will make the final cut, our standards are selective. Sarah noted the careful choice of words. Candidates, not recruits or trainees. These were the veterans being coerced into service, being evaluated for their usefulness. To the cartel. And those who don't make the cut, she asked, allowing a hint of professional curiosity to color her voice. Carlos's laugh held no humor. Let's just say we have ways of ensuring operational security. They continued through the facility, each step adding to Sarah's mental blueprint. Her military training had taught her to create detailed environmental maps without visual input, and now that skill was proving invaluable. She counted doors, measured distances, noted the position of every guard and security camera. This is our communication center, Carlos announced, as they entered a room humming with electronic equipment. From here, we coordinate all operational aspects of our organization. Sarah's acute hearing picked up the subtle sounds of encrypted radio traffic, multiple computer systems, and what seemed to be surveillance feeds. The cartel had built a sophisticated command and control center, likely run by veterans they'd forced into service. Captain Mitchell, a new voice called out, older, carrying the weight of authority. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Jefe Martinez, Carlos said respectfully, we weren't expecting you until later. Sarah turned toward the voice, recognizing the name from intelligence briefings. This was the cartel leader himself, the man behind the veteran recruitment operation. His presence confirmed the importance they placed on her potential recruitment. I make it a point to meet all our high-value candidates personally, Martinez said, his expensive shoes clicking on the floor as he approached, especially one with such an interesting background. Sarah could smell expensive cologne and cigar smoke as he drew near. I'm honored, she replied carefully, though I'm still not clear on exactly what role you envision for someone with my disability. Martinez's laugh was smooth, practiced. Your blindness, Captain, is precisely what makes you valuable to us. Who would suspect a blind woman of coordinating complex trafficking operations, of moving sensitive materials across borders? You're invisible in plain sight. Sarah allowed a thoughtful expression to cross her face, as if considering his words. Meanwhile, Zeus had positioned himself to scan the room's security systems, his specialized equipment mapping their electronic defenses. "You've built something impressive here," Sarah said, gesturing vaguely at their surroundings. "But I have to ask, what happens to those who decide this isn't for them?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "That's not a concern," Martinez replied, his voice hardening slightly. "Once someone joins our organization, they tend to find the benefits far outweigh any moral hesitations." Sarah nodded slowly, playing her role while her mind processed everything she'd learned. The facility was even larger than intelligence had suggested, with more veterans being held against their will than they'd estimated. She had enough information now to justify a full tactical response. "I'd like to think about your offer," she said carefully. "It's a big decision." "Of course," Martinez replied smoothly, "but don't think too long. Opportunities like this, they're time-sensitive. Carlos will show you to our guest quarters, where you can consider our proposition in comfort." As they left the communications center, Sarah could hear Martinez speaking quietly to Ricardo in Spanish, giving instructions she wasn't meant to understand. But her trained ear caught every word. "Watch her closely. If she shows any sign of hesitation, she knows too much to leave." Sarah kept her expression neutral as she was led down another corridor, her mind already formulating the next phase of her plan. The cartel had shown her exactly what she needed to see, believing her blindness made her harmless. Now it was time to show them just how wrong they were. Zeus pressed slightly against her leg, their predetermined signal that he had gathered. Sufficient tactical data. Everything was in place. The only question now was timing, and Sarah knew they couldn't wait much longer. The lives of dozens of veterans hung in the balance. The guest quarters turned out to be a well-appointed but carefully monitored room on the facility's second floor. Sarah heard the lock engage as soon as Carlos closed the door behind her. Zeus immediately began a thorough sweep of the space, his training allowing him to detect any surveillance devices while appearing to simply explore his new surroundings. Sarah moved to the window, appearing to rest her hand on the sill while actually gauging the distance to the ground and surrounding structures. Her acute hearing picked up the sound of guards positioned in the hallway, two men armed with what seemed to be automatic weapons based on the subtle sound of their equipment. "Good boy," she whispered to Zeus as he completed his sweep. Me. Dog had confirmed what she already suspected. Cameras in the corners of the room, listening devices in the light fixtures, and a signal jammer meant to block any unauthorized communications. What the cartel didn't know was that her team's equipment operated on frequencies their jammers couldn't detect. Sarah waited until she heard the guards complete their radio check, then activated her concealed communication device. "Ghost to command. Do you copy?" "Reading you clear, Ghost." Jack's voice came through, barely audible even to her enhanced hearing. "We've received the facility data from Zeus's equipment. Place is a fortress. At least 40 armed guards, multiple security systems, and we've confirmed 27 veterans being held against their will." "Make that 32, Sarah corrected quietly. "I heard Martinez himself confirm the number. They're keeping some of them in a secured area below the communications center. We need to move soon. They're starting to eliminate those who won't cooperate." She heard Jack's sharp intake of breath. "How do you want to play this?" "They'll be expecting me to try something during the night shift change. That's when security would theoretically be weakest." Sarah's lips curved in a slight smile. "So we're going to hit them now, in broad daylight, when they're least expecting it." "Bold move," Jack commented. You sure about this? They think. They have me contained, controlled. Their guard will be down. Plus, I've mapped every inch of this place. I know it better than they do now. Sarah's voice hardened. And Martinez is here. We take him. We can shut down their entire veteran exploitation operation. There was a brief pause as Jack consulted with the tactical team. Okay, Ghost. Task force is in position. How do you want to coordinate this? Sarah's mind raced through the mental map she'd built of the facility. 3 entry points. Main, gate, service entrance, and the hidden vehicle bay I detected on the east side. Split the team accordingly. When I give the signal, I'll trigger a disruption in their security system. That's your window to breach. And you? I'll make my way to the communications center. That's where they're coordinating everything, and it's closest to where they're holding most of the veterans. Zeus and I can handle any resistance we encounter. She paused, hearing footsteps approaching her room. Stand by. Company coming. The lock disengaged, and Sarah recognized Ricardo's footsteps entering the room. Captain Mitchell, he said smoothly, the Jefe has requested your presence. He's eager to discuss your role in our organization. Of course, Sarah replied, standing smoothly. Zeus. Heal. As they walked through the facility's corridors, Sarah continued building her mental map, noting any changes in guard positions or security patterns. Ricardo led her to what seemed to be a large office, based on the room's acoustics and the smell of leather and cigars. Ah, Captain, Martinez's voice carried across the space. I trust you've had time to consider our offer? Sarah allowed a small smile to play across her lips. I have, and I have some questions about the operation's security protocols. Oh? Martinez's tone held amusement. Please enlighten us with your professional assessment. For instance, Sarah said casually, moving further into the room, noting the positions of everyone present through sound and air movement. Your guard rotations are predictable. Your communication channels aren't as secure as you think. And you really should have checked Zeus more thoroughly for electronic devices. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Sarah heard multiple weapons being drawn, safeties clicking off. Martinez's amusement vanished from his voice. What have you done? Sarah's smile turned predatory as she reached down to Zeus's vest, pressing a hidden switch. Throughout the facility, alarms began blaring as their security systems crashed. I just gave your operation a serious problem. Kill her! Martinez shouted, but Sarah was already moving. The sound of approaching footsteps from the hallway told her the task force was right on schedule. As chaos erupted around her, Sarah Mitchell, the blind veteran they had so gravely underestimated, prepared to show the cartel exactly why. Her former team had called her Ghost. The real battle was about to begin, and this time she wasn't fighting alone. Chaos erupted in Martinez's office as Sarah dropped low, the sound of gunfire erupting above her head. Zeus responded instantly to her command, launching himself at the nearest guard while Sarah rolled behind a heavy desk. Her heightened senses painted a precise picture of the chaos, guards shouting, weapons being drawn, Martinez barking orders in rapid Spanish. Federal agents! Jack's voice boomed through the facility's corridors, accompanied by the sound of breaching charges detonating at multiple entry points. The task force had timed their assault perfectly with her signal. Sarah's military training took over, her other senses compensating for her lack of sight with extraordinary precision. She could hear Martinez trying to escape through a hidden door behind his desk, the slight scrape of panels sliding, the rush of air from the secret passage. Zeus, guard! Sarah commanded, knowing her loyal companion would keep the remaining guards at bay. She vaulted over the desk, her movements fluid and practiced, following the sound of Martinez's retreat. Her white cane snapped open with a flick of her wrist, becoming both navigation tool and weapon. Stop her! Martinez's voice echoed from the passage. More guards rushed in, but Sarah was ready. She had memorized every inch of this facility during her tour, and now that knowledge became her weapon. The first guard approached from her left. She could hear his boots on the marble floor, smell the gun oil on his weapon. Sarah moved with lethal precision, her cane striking pressure points with extraordinary accuracy. The guard went down. With a surprised grunt, two more rushed her from different angles, thinking to overwhelm the blind woman. But Sarah's other senses were sharper than any sight. She ducked under one attack, swept the legs from the second attacker, and disabled, both with efficient strikes to vulnerable points. Through it all, she kept track of Martinez's movement through the hidden passage. The sound of his expensive shoes on metal grating told her he was heading for the underground garage she had detected earlier. "Ghost to all units," Sarah spoke, into her concealed comm device as she pursued. "Primary target heading for underground exit, east side of the facility." "Copy that," Jack's voice crackled back. "Team 3 moving to intercept. Be advised, we're encountering heavy resistance in the main building. These guys are well trained." "They should be," Sarah replied grimly, moving swiftly through the passage. "They're veterans being forced to fight for the cartel. Remember, disable only. These are our people." The passage opened into a larger space, the underground garage, based on the echoes and the smell of exhaust. Sarah could hear Martinez ahead, shouting orders to start a vehicle, but she also heard something else, the scared breathing of several people being held in a nearby room. "More hostages in the garage area," she reported. "Moving to secure." Sarah approached carefully, using the sounds of chaos from above as cover. Her cane touched metal, a door. The lock was electronic, but the security systems were still scrambled from her earlier attack. "Stand back from the door," she called out softly. "Help is here." The sound of multiple people shuffling back reached her ears. Sarah found the control panel and pressed the emergency release she had noted during her earlier inspection. The door slid open with a hiss. "Federal Task Force," she announced to the frightened veterans inside. "We're getting you out of here. Stay quiet and follow my lead." But before she could move them to safety, the garage erupted with gunfire. Martinez had spotted her. Sarah pushed the rescued veterans back into cover, taking a defensive position at the doorway. "You've caused me quite a problem, Captain," Martinez called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I offered you everything: power, purpose, wealth. Instead, you chose to betray us." "You betrayed these veterans first," Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly through the space, "using their pain, their desperation, to force them into your service. That ends today." She could hear Martinez's men moving to surround her position, but she could also hear something they couldn't. The sound of the task force approaching through multiple entrances, moving quietly but steadily closer. "You're blind, Captain," Martinez sneered. "What makes you think you can stop us?" Sarah smiled, a cold expression that had once struck fear into enemy combatants. "I don't need eyes to see what you really are." She shifted her stance slightly. "Zeus, now!" The German shepherd, who had silently rejoined her, launched into action, creating a disruption that allowed Sarah to move. She flowed through the garage like a ghost, her movements precise and deadly. Every sound, every shift in air pressure, every echo told her exactly where her enemies were. Martinez's men fired, but Sarah was never where they aimed. She had turned the dark garage into her element, using their reliance on sight against them. In the chaos and shadows, the blind veteran had become their worst nightmare. The task force breached the garage just as Sarah cornered Martinez behind a column. The cartel leader raised his weapon, but Sarah was faster. Her cane struck his hand with precise force, disarming him instantly. "Federal agents! Freeze!" Jack's voice boomed through the garage. The sound of multiple weapons being dropped echoed through the space. The battle was over. Sarah stood over Martinez, her unseeing eyes fixed on him with unnerving accuracy. "You should have checked Zeus more thoroughly for equipment," she said quietly, "but then you were too busy underestimating the blind veteran." The aftermath of the raid unfolded like a well-orchestrated symphony to Sarah's enhanced hearing. Federal agents secured the facility room by room, while medical teams tended to the rescued veterans. Zeus remained vigilantly by her side as she stood in the command center, helping coordinate the operation's final phases. 32 veterans recovered, Jack reported, his voice carrying a mix of relief and anger. Most were being held against their will, forced to train cartel soldiers or run operations. Some had been here for months. Sarah nodded, her fingers running across a tactical display showing the facility's layout. "And Martinez?" "Singing like a bird," Jack replied with satisfaction. "Turns out he keeps detailed records. Names, dates, locations, everything we need to dismantle their entire veteran exploitation network across the border states." The sound of approaching footsteps caught Sarah's attention. Maria, based on her distinctive gait. "Ghost, you need to hear this," she said urgently. "We found more intelligence in their systems. This wasn't just about recruiting veterans for their skills. They were using them as test subjects." Sarah's expression hardened. "Test subjects for what?" "Experimental combat drugs," Maria explained, her voice tight with controlled rage. "They were developing compounds to enhance military performance, using desperate veterans as guinea pigs. Those who survived the trials were forced into service, those who didn't. That's why some veterans disappeared completely," Sarah finished grimly. "They weren't just eliminating security risks. They were covering up their experiments." More footsteps approached, Director Chen accompanied by several senior agents. "Captain Mitchell," he said formally, "the Attorney General has been briefed. This case is now a top priority for the Justice Department. Your operation has unveiled a criminal conspiracy that goes beyond anything we initially suspected." Sarah turned toward his voice. "The veterans they exploited. What happens to them?" "Full immunity and witness protection for those who cooperate," Chen assured her, "plus immediate access to VA medical care and counseling. We're not treating them as criminals. They're victims who survived something horrific." A commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Sarah heard the shuffle of multiple boots, the clink of handcuffs, and Martinez's voice raised in angry Spanish as he was led away. "He's demanding his lawyer," Jack commented dryly. "He'll need one," Sarah replied. "We have enough evidence to put him away for decades. But more importantly, we have what we need to help these veterans rebuild their lives." The sound of helicopter. Rotors approaching signaled the arrival of additional federal resources. Sarah could hear teams of investigators documenting everything, collecting evidence that would help dismantle similar operations across the border region. "There's something else," Maria added. "We found communications suggesting this wasn't their only facility. There are others, scattered across Mexico and the border states." Sarah nodded, having expected this. "Then our work isn't finished. These veterans answered the call to serve their country. Now it's our turn to serve them by shutting down every operation that preys on their vulnerability." Zeus pressed against her leg, sensing her determination. Sarah reached down to scratch behind his ears, drawing strength from his steady presence. The dog had proven himself more than just a service animal today. He was a warrior in his own right. "The AG wants you to lead a specialized task force," Chen announced, "focused specifically on veteran exploitation by criminal organizations. Your unique capabilities have proven invaluable." A slight smile crossed Sarah's face. "They never saw me coming. Too busy focusing on what they thought was a disability to recognize it was actually an advantage. Ghost Jack called out softly. "Some of the rescued veterans would like to speak with you. They've heard about what you did, how you infiltrated the facility despite your blindness. You've given them hope." Sarah straightened her shoulders, military bearing evident in her posture. "Hope is just the beginning. We're going to make sure every veteran knows they're not alone, that there's a way back from whatever darkness they've fallen into." As she moved to meet with the rescued veterans, Sarah could hear the continued sounds of the facility being dismantled, evidence being catalogued, computers being seized, cartel members being processed. But above all that, she heard something. More important, the voices of veterans who had finally found freedom from the cartel's grip. The battle was won, but Sarah knew the war was far from over. Somewhere out there, other cartels were targeting other veterans, exploiting their skills and their desperation. But now they would have to deal with something they never expected. A blind veteran who had turned her supposed disability into a weapon and who would stop at nothing to protect her fellow soldiers. "Ready for the next mission, boy?" she whispered to Zeus. His soft woof of agreement brought a smile to her face. The cartel had learned a hard lesson today about underestimating a blind veteran. Soon, others would learn that same lesson. 3 days after the raid, Sarah sat in the federal building's conference room, her fingers moving across detailed reports translated into Braille. Zeus lay at her feet as she briefed the joint task force on the intelligence gathered from Martinez's compound. "The network is bigger than we initially thought," Sarah explained, her voice carrying the weight of disturbing discoveries. "Martinez's operation was just one branch of a larger organization. They've been targeting veterans across multiple states, using different recruitment methods but the same basic approach." Jack leaned forward, his chair creaking slightly. "How are they identifying their targets?" "They're infiltrating veterans support groups, VA hospitals, even online forums," Sarah replied, her fingers tracing the patterns of data. "Looking for veterans who are struggling, financially, emotionally, or both. They offer help at first, seem like guardian angels. By the time the veterans realize what's really happening, they're too deeply involved to escape." Maria's voice came from across the room, tight with controlled anger. "The drug testing program was more extensive than we realized, too. They weren't just experimenting with combat enhancement drugs. They were developing new compounds, using veterans as unwilling test subjects." Sarah nodded grimly. "According to the files we recovered, they've been working on something they call Project Shadow, a combination of performance enhancers and psychological conditioning designed to create completely loyal operators. Many of the veterans didn't survive the testing phase. "We've identified 3 more facilities," Director Chen added. 2 in Mexico, 1 near the Arizona border, all using similar methods to exploit veterans. Sarah's fingers paused on a particular section of the report. "There's something else. The communications we intercepted suggest they're planning something big. Multiple references to a Phase 2 operation, scheduled to begin within the next month." "Any idea what they're planning?" Jack asked. "Not yet," Sarah replied. "But given the number of veterans they've been recruiting and the scale of their drug program, it's likely to be significant. They're building an army, and they're not doing it just for show." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah could hear the subtle shifts in breathing, the tension building in the air. Finally, Chen spoke again. "The Attorney General has approved the formation of a specialized unit focused specifically on dismantling these veteran exploitation networks. Captain Mitchell, given your unique capabilities and your success with the Martinez operation, we want you to lead it." Sarah turned toward his voice. "What kind of operational authority are we talking about?" "Full tactical autonomy," Chen replied. "You'll have access to whatever resources you need. The only condition is that we prioritize rescuing veterans over making arrests. These people have served their country. They deserve our help, not our judgment. Agreed, Sarah said firmly, but we need to move fast. Every day we wait, more veterans fall into their trap. Jack's voice carried a note of concern. The other facilities will be expecting us now. After what happened with Martinez, they'll be on high alert. A slight smile crossed Sarah's face. Good. Let them be nervous. Let them waste resources looking for traditional threats. They still won't see us coming. What's our first move? Maria asked. Sarah stood, Zeus rising smoothly with her. We start with the Arizona facility. According to the intel, that's where they're conducting the most aggressive phase of Project Shadow. We shut that down first. We disrupt their entire operation. I'll have tactical teams ready within 48 hours, Jack said. Make it 24, Sarah countered. Based on the communication patterns we've intercepted, they're already starting to move sensitive materials. We need to hit them before they can relocate their operation. She moved to the tactical display, her fingers finding the facility's location on the raised surface. They think they can hide in plain sight, using their legitimate business fronts as cover, but we have something they don't expect. Veterans who've escaped their program, willing to help us take them down. The survivors from Martinez's compound, Chen asked. Sarah nodded. Many of them have crucial intelligence about the cartel's operations. More importantly, they want to help prevent other veterans from falling into the same trap. They know the signs, the recruitment tactics, the conditioning methods. It's risky, Jack cautioned. These people have been through trauma. Are you sure they're ready for this? They're veterans, Sarah replied simply. They've been trained to turn trauma into strength. Right now, they need a mission, a purpose. We can give them that while using their knowledge to save others. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence of decision rather than doubt. Sarah could hear the subtle sounds of preparation beginning, equipment being checked, communications being established, plans being formulated. Very well, Captain, Chen said finally. Your task force has the green light. What do you need? Sarah's unseeing eyes seemed to fix on each person in the room. Everything we can get, because this isn't just about stopping criminal exploitation anymore. This is about protecting our own, about showing every veteran out there that they're not alone. Zeus pressed against her leg, sensing her determination. The cartel had thought they could prey on vulnerable veterans with impunity. They were about to learn that they had awakened something far more dangerous, a network of warriors determined to protect their own, led by a blind veteran who had turned darkness into her greatest weapon. The Arizona facility loomed in the pre-dawn darkness, its legitimate facade as a private security training center hiding darker purposes within. Sarah stood with her team a mile out, the desert wind carrying subtle sounds that painted a detailed picture in her mind. Zeus remained, alert at her side, his specialized equipment already gathering crucial data about the compound's defenses. Thermal imaging confirms heavy activity inside, Jack reported quietly. At least 60 people, with concentrated groups in the southern wing. That's likely where they're holding the veterans. Sarah nodded, her other senses providing additional intelligence. They've upgraded their security since Martinez's compound. Triple perimeter motion sensors, armed patrols. They're expecting trouble. But not from us, Maria added, her voice carrying a hint of grim satisfaction. Our inside source confirms they're looking for conventional attacks. They've never dealt with someone who can map an entire facility through sound and air pressure. The inside source, a veteran who had escaped their program 2 weeks ago, had provided crucial intelligence about the facility's layout and operations. More importantly, he had confirmed Sarah's suspicions about Project Shadow. The labs are in the sub-basement, Sarah said, her voice hardening. That's where they're conducting the drug trials. According to our source, they've accelerated the program since Martinez's capture. They're getting desperate. Jack's tactical team was spread out in precise positions, waiting for her signal. How do you want to play this, Ghost? Sarah's fingers traced her tactical display one final time. Three-phase approach. First, we trigger their perimeter alarms, make them think they're under attack from the north. While their forces are responding, we infiltrate from the south through the maintenance tunnels. They'll have those secured, Maria pointed out. A slight smile crossed Sarah's face. They'll have them guarded, yes, but they won't be expecting someone who can navigate perfectly in total darkness. Zeus and I will lead the first team in, disable their internal security. That's when Phase 2 begins. The plan was precise, utilizing Sarah's unique capabilities to their full advantage. While the facility's defenders would be focused on traditional threats, relying on visual surveillance and standard tactical responses, she would move through their defenses like a ghost. Remember, Sarah added, her voice carrying to all teams, many of the armed personnel inside are veterans being coerced through drugs and psychological conditioning. Non-lethal takedowns only. Our priority is rescuing them, not adding to their trauma. The teams acknowledged, and Sarah felt Zeus tense slightly beside her. He sensed the approaching operation. The specially trained German shepherd had proven himself invaluable in previous missions, his abilities complementing Sarah's in perfect synchronization. Thermal shows they're rotating guards now, Jack reported. 10-minute window approaching. Sarah nodded, running her hand along Zeus's specialized vest one final time. Phase 1 initiates on my mark. All teams prepare to execute. The desert. Wind carried the subtle sounds of her teams moving into position. Sarah's heightened senses detected every detail. The slight crunch of boots on sand, the subtle metallic sounds of equipment being checked, the controlled breathing of trained operators preparing for action. Their overconfidence is their weakness, Sarah said quietly. They think their security is unbreakable because they're relying on what they can see. They haven't learned that vision can be deceiving. That's why they'll never see you coming, Maria replied with quiet confidence. Sarah's posture straightened, her military bearing evident as she prepared to lead her team. The cartel had built their operation on exploiting veterans' vulnerabilities, never imagining that those same veterans would become their downfall. Remember, she said into her comm unit, timing is crucial. Once we're inside, we'll have 18 minutes to reach the labs before their backup protocols kick in. The veterans being held there don't have protective gear. If they trigger their chemical countermeasures, those people are at risk. The wind shifted slightly, bringing new sounds from the facility. The hum of generators, the subtle electronic whine of security systems, the movement of patrols. To Sarah's enhanced hearing, it was like reading an open book. They're rotating the East Guard post now, she reported, switching to night vision equipment. They're expecting visual threats. A cold smile touched her lips. Too bad they can't see in the dark like I can. Zeus pressed against her leg, their signal that all teams were in final position. Sarah took a moment to center herself, letting her other senses expand to their full capability. In the darkness, she wasn't blind. She was in her element. Ghost to all units, she spoke clearly into her comm. Phase 1 initiates in 3, 2, 1. Execute. The night erupted into carefully orchestrated chaos as her plan began to unfold. The cartel was about to learn that their greatest threat wasn't what they could see, it was what they couldn't see coming. Sarah moved forward, Zeus at her side, ready to bring justice to those who had preyed on her fellow veterans. The real battle was about to begin, and this time, darkness would be their ally. The maintenance tunnel echoed with subtle vibrations as Sarah and her team moved silently through the darkness. Above ground, the diversion was working perfectly. She could hear the facility's security forces responding to the false threat on their northern perimeter, leaving their southern defenses vulnerable. "First checkpoint ahead," Sarah whispered, her enhanced hearing detecting the guards' positions. 2 men, both armed, they're using night vision equipment. A slight smile crossed her face. "That won't help them in here." Zeus moved silently beside her, his specialized training allowing him to navigate the darkness as effectively as his handler. Sarah gave him a silent command, and the German shepherd took position. "Disable their communications first," Sarah instructed her team. "Then we move. Remember, these are veterans being controlled through drugs and conditioning. Take them down clean." The operation unfolded with surgical precision. Sarah moved through the darkness like a ghost, her other senses painting a perfect picture of her surroundings. The guards never saw her coming, their night vision equipment actually hampering their ability to detect movement in the absolute darkness. "Checkpoint clear," Jack reported quietly. "Security systems still showing normal status." Sarah nodded, her fingers brushing against the tunnel wall to confirm their position. "The lab access point is 200 meters ahead. Maria, what's our status topside?" "They're still focused on the northern perimeter," Maria replied through the comm. "Thermal imaging shows most of their forces concentrated there, but we're picking up increased activity in the sub-basement. They might be suspecting something." "Then we move faster," Sarah decided. "Zeus, point." The team advanced through the tunnel system, Sarah's acute hearing detecting every potential threat before it materialized. Her mental map of the facility, built from their intelligence and her own enhanced senses, guided them unerringly toward their target. They reached the lab access point to find it heavily secured. Electronic locks, motion sensors, and what Sarah's sensitive hearing identified as pressure plates in the floor. "They've upgraded their security since Martinez's compound," Jack observed. "But they still have the same weakness," Sarah replied. "They rely too much on visual confirmation." Her fingers found the control panel, interpreting the subtle differences in surface temperature to identify the correct sequence. "Watch and learn." Within moments, the security systems were disabled, the door opening silently. Sarah led her team into the facility's sub-basement, where the true horror of Project Shadow awaited. The first thing that hit her was the smell. Antiseptic, overlaying something darker, more chemical. Then came the sounds, muffled groans, mechanical beeps, and the subtle whir of laboratory equipment. "Multiple holding cells to the left," Sarah reported, her hearing painting a detailed picture. "Labs straight ahead. I'm counting at least 20 heartbeats, veterans being held for testing." "Security station at 2 o'clock, Jack added. 2 guards. Sarah nodded. "Zeus, disable." The German shepherd moved like a shadow, taking down both guards before they could raise an alarm. Sarah's team secured them quickly, using zip ties rather than handcuffs. These men were victims too, even if they didn't know it yet. The laboratory itself was a testament to the cartel's cruelty. Sarah's enhanced senses detected details her team's eyes might miss. The subtle sounds of restraints on hospital beds, the irregular breathing patterns of drugged veterans, the sharp chemical smell of experimental compounds. "Dear God," Maria whispered, examining the medical equipment. "They're not just testing drugs, they're attempting complete psychological reprogramming." "Get these people out," Sarah ordered, her voice hard with controlled rage. "Medical team standing by, ready and waiting," Jack confirmed. "But Ghost, we've got another problem. Computer systems showing massive data deletion in progress. They must have triggered their failsafe." Sarah moved to the central control station, her fingers finding the keyboard. "Maria, jack in. Use the bypass codes from Martinez's compound. They're arrogant. They wouldn't have changed their core protocols." While her team worked to save the data and free the veterans, Sarah's hearing picked up new movement from above. "Multiple teams converging on our position. They've figured out the diversion." "How many?" Jack asked, already moving to defensive positions. 24, heavily armed, moving in tactical formation. Sarah's head tilted slightly. But their movements are erratic, heart rates elevated, breathing irregular. Her expression hardened. They're using their own people as test subjects for the combat drugs. Time to go to Phase 3? Maria asked, still working on the computer system. Sarah nodded grimly. Signal the outer teams, full containment protocol, and get ready. These men won't go down easily. The drugs make them almost immune to pain. Zeus pressed against her leg, sensing the approaching conflict. Sarah reached down to touch his vest, confirming his specialized equipment was still functioning. They had prepared for this, trained for it, but facing chemically enhanced veterans would test them all. Remember, Sarah said to her team as the sound of boots on stairs grew closer, these are our brothers and sisters up there. The cartel turned them into weapons, but we're here to bring them home. The first explosion rocked the facility as the outer teams began their assault. In the confined space of the sub-basement, Sarah prepared to face an enemy she couldn't see, but then she never needed eyes to fight. The real battle for the souls of these veterans was about to begin. The sub-basement erupted into chaos as the first wave of drugged veterans burst through the stairwell doors. Sarah's enhanced hearing detected everything: their erratic heartbeats, their chemically altered breathing patterns, the unnatural strength in their movements. "Non-lethal takedowns only," she commanded through the comm. "These men aren't in control of their actions." Her fingers tightened on her tactical baton as she moved to intercept the first attacker. The fighting was unlike anything they'd encountered before. The drugged veterans seemed almost superhuman, shrugging off strikes that should have incapacitated them. But Sarah had trained for this moment, using her other senses to detect weaknesses even the combat drugs couldn't eliminate. "They're operating on pure aggression," she called out, ducking under a wild swing and striking precisely at nerve clusters. "The drugs eliminate their pain response, but they also destroy their tactical judgment. Use that against them." Zeus moved through the chaos like a precision weapon, his specialized training allowing him to take down enhanced opponents without causing permanent harm. Sarah could hear the sound of her team adapting to her strategy, using the drugged veterans' lack of coordination against them. "Maria, status on the data," Sarah called out while deflecting another attack. "Almost there," Maria replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "They tried to wipe everything, but I've recovered most of the Project Shadow files, including their distribution network." A new sound caught Sarah's attention. Helicopter rotors, approaching fast. "Jack, we've got incoming. Sounds like their rapid response team." "On it," Jack responded. "Outer teams are moving to intercept. But Ghost, we've got another problem. These combat drugs, they're not just enhancement compounds. They're killing these men. Their vital signs are going critical." Sarah's jaw tightened as she processed this information. Her enhanced hearing confirmed it. The drugged veterans' heartbeats were dangerously irregular, their breathing becoming more labored with each passing minute. "Medical team, prepare for mass casualties," she ordered through the comm. "These men need immediate treatment for chemical overdose." She turned toward where she knew Maria was working. "Tell me you found something in those files about an antidote." "Better," Maria replied. "Found their entire formula database, including the countermeasures they developed for their own security teams, sending it to the medical unit now." Another explosion rocked the facility from above. Sarah's hearing picked up the sound of the outer teams engaging the helicopter forces, but her focus remained on the immediate threat. The drugged veterans were still coming, their enhanced strength making them incredibly dangerous. "They're not going to stop," Jack called out, grunting as he restrained another attacker. "The drugs won't let them." "Then we make them stop," Sarah replied grimly. She reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a specialized device, something they'd developed specifically for this mission. "Everyone, masks on. Zeus, guard position." With precise movements, she activated the device, releasing a carefully formulated sedative gas into the air. The compound had been designed based on intelligence gathered from Martinez's compound, strong enough to overcome the combat drug's effects, but safe enough to avoid causing additional harm. "Hold your positions," Sarah commanded, as the gas began to take effect. Her enhanced hearing tracked the changes in the drugged veteran's vital signs, heartbeats slowly stabilizing, breathing patterns returning to normal as they lost consciousness. Within minutes, the fighting stopped. Sarah moved through the space, checking each fallen veteran with gentle touches, confirming they were alive and beginning to stabilize. "Medical team, move in," she ordered. "Priority to those showing the most severe symptoms. Maria, make sure that formula database gets to our doctors. They'll need it to develop long-term treatment protocols." "What about the helicopter team?" Jack asked, helping secure the unconscious veterans. Sarah's head tilted slightly as she listened to the battle above. "Outer teams have it handled. They're using the same sedative gas protocols we just employed. The cartel's forces are dropping like flies." "Ghost," Maria called out urgently, "found something else in their files. This facility, it's not just a testing site. It's their primary production facility for the entire Southeast. They've got a massive stockpile of the combat drugs somewhere on site." Sarah nodded grimly. "That's why they fought so hard to protect it. Start scanning the building." Schematics. A stockpile that large would need specific environmental controls. "Already on it," Maria replied. "Thermal imaging is showing a cold room behind the main lab. Heavy security, separate ventilation system." "That's it," Sarah confirmed. "Get our EOD team down here. We need to secure those drugs for evidence, but carefully. Based on what we've seen, this stuff is highly unstable." Zeus pressed against her leg, his subtle signal that all immediate threats were neutralized. Sarah reached down to scratch his ears, taking a moment to center herself as the operation moved into its final phase. "Status report," she called out to her team. 28 veterans secured, all receiving medical treatment," Jack reported. "No fatalities, though some will need intensive care to overcome the drug effects. Helicopter team neutralized, facility perimeter secured." "And the data?" Sarah asked. "Got it all," Maria confirmed. "Everything about Project Shadow. Their formulas, their testing protocols, their entire distribution network. Enough evidence to take down their whole operation." Sarah nodded, satisfaction mixing with determination in her expression. They'd won this battle, saved these veterans, but she knew the war was far from over. Somewhere out there, other cartels were watching, learning, planning their own operations. But now they would know. Anyone who tried to exploit veterans would have to deal with her, and she would show them that sometimes the most dangerous opponent was the one you never saw coming. 1 week after the Arizona raid, Sarah sat in the federal building's main conference room, her fingers moving across the final operation report in Braille. The rescue had been more successful than they'd initially hoped. All 28 veterans were recovering, the cartel's drug production facility was dismantled, and their intelligence had led to raids on 3 other locations across the border. States. "The Attorney General is very pleased with the results," Director Chen announced to the assembled team. "The intelligence we recovered has already led to dozens of arrests, and we've identified over 200 veterans who are being targeted for recruitment." "More importantly," Sarah added, her voice carrying quiet satisfaction, "we've established a support network for those affected. Every veteran rescued from these operations is receiving full medical care, psychological support, and witness protection if needed." Jack shifted in his chair beside her. "The combat drugs are proving harder to deal with. Some of the veterans are experiencing severe withdrawal symptoms, and the psychological conditioning isn't easy to break." "But we're making progress," Maria interjected. The formula database we recovered is helping doctors develop targeted treatments, and having other survivors involved in the recovery process is making a huge difference. Sarah nodded, remembering the sounds of reunions. She'd witnessed veterans helping veterans the way it should be. Zeus lay quietly at her feet, his mission complete, but his vigilance never wavering. "There's something else," Chen said, his tone growing serious. "We've analyzed the complete Project Shadow files. The Arizona facility wasn't just about creating enhanced fighters. They were developing something bigger, a way to create completely controlled operators, veterans who could be programmed for any mission with no moral constraints." "They failed," Sarah stated firmly. "These men and women proved stronger than their conditioning. When given the chance to break free, they took it." "Thanks to you," Jack added. "Your operation showed them they weren't alone, that someone was fighting for them." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "We fought for them because that's what veterans do. We take care of our own." The sound of approaching footsteps caught her attention moments before the conference room door opened. "Captain Mitchell," a familiar voice called out. "One of the rescued veterans, Michael Torres. Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to hear." "Go ahead, Michael," Sarah encouraged, noting the strength that had returned to his voice since his rescue. "We've been monitoring the veterans' support networks like you asked," he reported. "Chatter suggests the cartels are changing tactics. They're scared now, scared of the blind veteran who can see through their operations." A slight smile touched Sarah's lips. "Good. Let them be scared. Let them know that targeting veterans comes with a price." "There's more," Michael continued. "Other veterans are stepping forward, wanting to help. Your operation showed them they don't have to hide, don't have to face these threats alone. They're calling you Ghost now, the guardian they never see coming." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What had started as a single operation had grown into something larger, a movement of veterans protecting veterans. "Director," Sarah said, turning toward Chen's position, "I want to expand the task force, build a network of veterans helping us identify and prevent exploitation before it starts. No one knows these signs better than those who've survived them." "Agreed," Chen replied without hesitation. "The Attorney General has already approved additional funding. Whatever you need, Captain." Sarah stood, Zeus rising smoothly with her. "Then let's get to work. The cartels think losing their Arizona facility has crippled them. Let's show them that was just the beginning." "What's our next target?" Jack asked, already reaching for his tactical maps. "Everywhere they operate," Sarah replied, her unseeing eyes somehow managing to fix each person in the room with their intensity. "Every support group they've infiltrated, every veteran they're targeting, every facility they're building. We shut them all down." She moved to the tactical display, her fingers finding the locations they'd identified from the recovered data. "They thought they could exploit veterans' vulnerabilities, use our skills and training against us. Instead, they've united us, created something they never expected." "A force they'll never see coming," Maria added with quiet satisfaction. Sarah nodded, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Exactly. Because they're still looking for traditional threats, still relying on what they can see. They haven't learned that true strength isn't about vision, it's about purpose." Zeus pressed against her leg, ever vigilant, ever ready. Sarah reached down to touch his head, drawing strength from his unwavering loyalty. The cartel had thought her blindness made her vulnerable, never realizing it had made her more dangerous than they could imagine. "Remember," she said to her team, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had led men in combat, "we're not just fighting a cartel anymore. We're fighting for every veteran who's been exploited, every soldier who's lost their way, and we won't stop until every last one of them is free." The room filled with sounds of agreement, chairs moving, equipment being gathered, plans being made. Sarah stood in the midst of it all, her enhanced senses painting a picture of determination and purpose. The cartels had wanted an army of controlled veterans. Instead, they'd created their own worst nightmare, a force of free veterans, led by a blind warrior who had turned darkness into her greatest weapon. And this was only the beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.